Hey, it's Mac with PriceActionTradingSystem.com, and it is Wednesday, and it's January 20th. This will be our chart lesson for today. It's all uphill today. Really started yesterday afternoon, right after the market opened, shortly after 5 something. We had a little two-legged correction, and it was all uphill from that, and it kind of accelerated as the day went on. Really what this is a spike in a channel. We spiked up. There's a couple of channels here to different. This is actually a channel within the blue channel, and it looked like maybe the blue channel was going to end here. But you'll see this a lot where when the market's strong, and you'll see it to the downside too. Maybe this is a little bit too steep, so the market levels off and makes a little flatter channel. And sometimes you'll see it do that a couple of times. So, like here, it got real steep and then it kind of flattened out, a little correction. But that's all within the bigger yellow one. So there's really two main channels here, the blue one, and then we flattened out into the yellow one, and everything else are just smaller moves going on within the larger ones. And again, you'll see that to the downside. Maybe we start out at this angle, then it drops straight down, or maybe it's real steep and then it flattens out. So you see this in both directions. This is not uncommon. It doesn't happen every day, but it's not uncommon either. So learn this pattern. Make sure you understand this, because the first thing people say was, well, we had a break here at a new high, so I started looking for shorts. Well, that's your expectation. But that doesn't mean that's the trade you take. If the EMA still starts pointing straight back up again and everything's above it, and you find a trend line, by all means trade it. Don't argue with it. And just I don't know why people think that. That's the one thing about price action, is we've got a set of rules that we like to follow. But the problem is nothing is 100% in price action. Uh, that you have to read the chart and kind of figure out what's going on. And so pay attention to the chart and not necessarily what you expect prices to do. So again, even though we had a break and a new high here with that EMA pointing straight up and you got a clear trend channel here, just stay with that thing. I looked at this channel a couple of different ways. I really think it's like this right here. That's the way I kind of played it. But sometimes you can find the trend lines off the highs. So in other words, if you can't find it off this side, maybe you draw it across here. And then drag it down. And that still fits. So maybe that's what it is. It looks like another spiking channel. Look, we spiked up and went into that channel. And I believe that to be correct right there. So, yeah, I like that. So that's a little different than I originally drew it. But you really still get to the same place. It doesn't really change much. So, but anyway, let's back out and talk about the trade. You see, it's an uptrend day, and there's two clear channels in play: the blue and the yellow one. And the yellow one didn't help you a whole lot. You really had to play the shorter term ones within that. So, let's back out where we can see this a little bit better, and we'll go through each trade. 7 o'clock, you had to be a little patient today, because 7 o'clock came on this move up, and there is a failed second entry short right here. However, a reversal failure like that, you want it to be off the EMA, not way up here. It's just even though it works, that's not a good setup. So just sit tight and you wait, and you come back and you get a first entry and you get a second entry. I marked this second entry as green because we just came off the highs, and it looks like we probably have an overshoot on top of that. Maybe we don't have an overshoot there, but it looks like we could, and there's really no way to know for sure. And so I'm a little hesitant with all these little small dojis and sideways looking stuff, but it is a second entry. It is a fairly strong move. It is right off what looks to be a midline there. And this is another one I drew it off the highs and then drug the trend line down. So that's how I found that. And originally I had it a little bit lower, but I tightened it to this higher one here, because it didn't catch it otherwise. And you can see it did come back into play here and here and here. So that's how I find that particular trend line. And sometimes you don't get a lot of price action off the lows like this, but you see how I got it off the top. And that's really how I determined this was more of a spiking channel, because I drew it off the tops. It just didn't look right. And then suddenly it fits and you realize, hey, this is a spiking channel. So I didn't see that in real time, to be honest. And I just noticed it a minute ago because the channel didn't look quite right. But anyway, second entry long there, for the reasons I just told you. I'm not crazy about it, but there's reasons to like that trade, and so I marked it green. But when you get the failure there, the third attempt to go lower and the double test of that EMA, and this actually broke lower first and turned up and went out the other side. I like going long there. And I draw that trend line across there just in case. And of course we come back and we bounce off of it again, and then we bounce off of it and get a second entry long and confirm that trend line in the EMA yet again. Just go long. Don't argue with it. There it is. We run up. You get a first entry. You actually turn down here and turn back up. I can't remember if that. Yes, it does go lower there. I think I meant to mark that trade for at least green. And again, it turns to, it's almost a repeat of this. Pull back, and you get your second entry all in one bar on this one, though. It turns down. Now, let me explain this again. You move down, you go first entry when it breaks higher, and then it turns down again, and then turns back up. I think the problem is the reason I didn't mark this is I think this one broke higher first, then turned down, and then went back up. And in that case, you wouldn't want to take it. But I did want to point it out, and that's why I made it green. So there's some reasons, because I don't know exactly how that played out. It's hard to know. If it just broke higher right there first and then turned down, then I wouldn't take that trade. But this one breaks one tick lower right here and then turns up, and that's definitely a first entry, second entry. So I like that one, and that's right off that key entry point. And you confirmed it 2 or 3 times right there, and that turns out to be a nice trade. There's actually a failed second entry short here, and it is off that key entry point. But it's at the very high of the day, only a few ticks. It's way away from the EMA. It's just too dangerous. You get another second entry long right here, but that's an inside bar, and you're way away from the EMA. And there's that same repeat pattern. If that would have been at the EMA, I'd say maybe you take that. But we've already had a break and a couple of legs up, and we're not quite to the highs here yet, though, so you might be expecting prices may try to make another move up. This is a really strong market here, so that's one that you might consider. So I didn't mark it, but you could argue for that one to be green maybe. It's just never a good idea to enter way away from the EMA like that. Where was it? Right here. Because we're overdue, and you notice it didn't go far before it snaps back, and that's generally what happens. And sometimes you don't get enough to get a scalp out of it. So I'm pretty sure there's enough room there. You would want to know there's enough room for sure. So when that breaks higher, 31.75, and that went to, yeah. So there's enough to easily get out of that one. That would be the other stipulation, is you got to have room to get out before those highs. So always check that. And we come back, and then we're moving up again, and then we just go sideways. Don't enter in that. You'll get chopped to pieces. You don't want to go long or short there. It's just too tight. And of course your first entry and second entry, but I wouldn't go long with that channel still in play, and I don't think I would go short yet. There is a failed second entry long. I believe it's right here. Make sure I'm not misleading you. Yeah, first entry, second entry. But you got to go short at a 2-bar matching low at the very low of that move, and that's never a good idea. Notice how it doesn't go very far. And you probably wouldn't, it doesn't look like there's enough room to get out of that trade. So again, I'm just going to check it, make sure I'm telling you properly. So your entry would have been 27.50, and that goes to 26. So you would have just barely got out, well, by the skin of your teeth. But I don't like that trade. I still wouldn't mark it. But you would have got out of that by one tick. You had one tick to spare. But then it bounces real strongly. First entry short. I'd be a little leery about going long yet. But that's a really strong move. Something suddenly changed for this to reverse and shoot right through the EMA, pull back. You get a first entry, and I definitely wouldn't go short yet there. That's a little bit congested, but when it turns down and fails and turns up and gives you a second entry long, I like going long there because that's a strong clue that, hey, a lot of buying came back in for some reason, and you should get a second leg up at a minimum right there, most likely. And so your target's up here. You can see we went a little further before we corrected. And then this pulls back and really tests the midline and this trend line. I played around with that. I'll have it off a little bit from where I originally had it. Well, anyway, originally it bounced right off my midline and my trend line there, and the EMA is not far either. But I like it because notice there's a new low there, and you get a first entry, and then you get a second entry, and it fails. And you get a nice bullish bar there. There's not a lot of room right here. So generally that would be something you'd be concerned of, but it's obvious that this trend line's in play right here. And so I like going long there because it's just another bounce, a failure off that trend line. And you can see it does take on off. We're just too far away from the EMA to be entering up here, even though this is a strong trend. And if you really wanted to hunt for an entry, you could probably enter right here because it is a failed second entry short. Notice that you have a new low here. It's lower than that swing low. So first entry, second entry, and I believe this turns down and then turns up and goes out the other side. And so that would have been a good place to play a trap. So you could have played that one. I'll mark it green. Is that it? No, it's right there. And then definitely you don't want to be entering up here. And you don't want to go short yet either. It's tempting to go short right here, but this has been such a strong trend, and that's just sideways. It would have worked. I don't know if you could have got in it because it just skips right over and keeps going. You might could have got filled there, but you're better off to wait. And if you do, then you suddenly get a chance on this second entry long. And this was a great reversal because this closes on its low and this opens a tick lower and then turns instantly and goes up and goes right out the other side. You could wait on this one to close, and you probably should have, but when that closes, when that opens it on its low and closes on its very high, I like going long one tick above that. Actually, I'm not averse to playing the engulfing bar here and having your buy stop one tick above this one. And you definitely would have got filled there. The other issue is if you tried to go long here, you may not have got filled because it probably went off without you. You know, whenever that moves real quick, always drop a limit order there and give it as long as it doesn't go too far. If it backs, a lot of times it'll back up to fill that little gap. Notice there's no overlap right there. And so technically that's a gap. Oh, and you'll see that a lot. Prices gap over the EMA, or they gap over the trend line, or they gap over a midline. That's usually a good indication that your lines are drawn properly when you see those gaps like that, because I don't know why they do it, but prices will gap over those areas. Some people call those thin spots. But if you see it over your trend, you see it when it gaps over your trend line, it's usually a good indication you got your trend line drawn in the right place. So you get that little jump over right there, and this thing takes off, and that would have been a great afternoon trade right there. And that took you into the 2 o'clock hour. Notice there's another second entry long right here, but it's a little bit too late into the day. It's not a perfect signal bar, but it is right off the midline, and we've been above that midline for a long time, so that makes that midline probably valid enough to take a trade if you get a good setup off of it. But anyway, that's what I saw today. Not a lot of trades, but there were some pretty good ones. Several runners. These are the kind of days you want to try to hold a runner, because if you catch one, you might get a good move. It doesn't look like it, but this is a very strong trend. When you see these little bitty bars with very shallow corrections with lots of stems, that's a strong trend, and that gives you some more. That's more reason you might go long off this midline right here, because it's such a strong trend. When you get a good setup off of it, it's something to pay attention to. It'd be the same thing with this trend right here. You know, I talked about the failed second entry short right here. You might take that trade. Of course, it's not looking that strong right here. It looks pretty strong from here, but then it looks like it's just gonna, after the open, it looks like a normal kind of regular day with a little upward bias that could be ending, because now we've got 2 legs up. If you look at this, you really have leg 1 and then leg 2. You don't quite have leg 2, and it's having a hard time getting there. So you might think, hey, this thing might roll over, and so it doesn't look that strong right there. But then suddenly it takes off again at that key entry point right there, which you had to be a little better at this to find that off the highs. But it takes off and it suddenly looks strong again. So you might take that failed second entry short right there off that key entry point. And right here at this midline, of course, you wouldn't have known that yellow midline is there at that point, but that's another one. When it broke lower first and turned up, you might go long there just because it's a strong market. It's off that short-term key entry point. But the further it gets away from that EMA, the more suspect your entries get. The one good thing about it is you don't have any real strong corrections. Notice the corrections are only a tick or two each time, and so they're very low risk really. You're either going to be right or wrong, and it's going to be quick, and you're going to know pretty quickly. So just something to think about. But make sure you understand how to recognize these trends are really strong, even though they don't look like it. Again, you see all these little bars with lots of stems, and they'll be on both sides, and your corrections are very shallow and generally consist of, like this one, big stems. Here you got a little bit of a correction without the stems, but most of them are just very shallow, and when you get one, there's a lot of stems, and that's a strong trend, even though it doesn't necessarily look like it just looking at the chart. Learn to recognize those, because you'll see these quite often. You'll see them to the downside too, so make sure you pay attention to that. But anyway, I'm going to wrap it up. We'll be back again to do it tomorrow, and actually, yeah, tomorrow's going to wrap up another week. We lost a day because of the holiday. I can't believe tomorrow's already the end of the week for us. No chart lessons on Friday, so as far as chart lessons go, it's the end of the week tomorrow. So we'll be back again tomorrow, and we'll wrap up the week. And it was a short week this week. Hope you had a good trading day. I'll see you tomorrow. This is Mac with PriceActionTradingSystem.com.